This podcast contains adult content and discussions of first-time sexual experiences. Listener discretion is advised. Some stories may include themes that are sensitive or triggering for some audiences. Welcome to Sexual Encounters, the very first time, the podcast where we talk about first times for better, worse, and everything in between. I'm Mary Jane, and today we're diving into something that doesn't get talked about enough: the emotional side of first sexual experiences. Because sure, we hear a lot about the physical, the awkwardness, the pain, the pleasure. But what about everything that happens inside? The feelings we didn't expect, the realizations we weren't ready for, the way those first moments sometimes shape how we see ourselves and our relationships. In this episode, we're not just talking about what happened, we're talking about how it felt. Because whether it was sweet, confusing, disappointing, empowering, or even just quiet, those emotional firsts leave an imprint. And they deserve space too. So many of us were taught, directly or not, that sex is supposed to be romantic, perfect, or at least passionate. But what if it's just fine, or weird, or really, really quiet? I shared in the first episode that my own experience wasn't painful or dramatic, but it definitely wasn't the magical moment TV makes it out to be. Did I mourn my virginity afterward? Honestly, yes. In a way I didn't expect. It wasn't in the moment itself. It happened later, while sitting in the library with a friend of mine. I told her about my sexual encounter while we were studying, and she started crying. And then I started crying. And there we were, two girls crying over something we couldn't quite name. It felt like a funeral of sorts, not for a person, but for a part of myself I hadn't quite understood I was letting go, pouring out emotions I hadn't even realized I was carrying. But did I feel different afterward? Not really. I just got on with life. So, with that in mind, let's bust a few myths about the emotional realities of first sexual encounters. Dr. Markie, renowned sexologist and recent winner of the 2025 Sexuality Educator Award of the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors and Therapists, or ASECT, joins us once again on this episode to help us unpack some of the myths around how we should feel emotionally after first-time sex. A big congratulations to Dr. Markie on this incredible and well-deserved recognition. Dr. Markie, today we're talking about the emotional realities of sexual experiences, and there's so much pressure around people and how they're supposed to feel afterward. I'd love to bust a few common myths that show up in a lot of our first-time narratives and get your thoughts on how these expectations can impact people emotionally. Let's talk about this myth that it will be magical if it's with the right person. This says that emotions alone guarantee a perfect and fulfilling experience. Can you help us unpack this one?
Absolutely. And I really appreciate the space of where this myth comes from because I get it, right? I think I recently experienced what is unfortunately unrequited love with this Afro Brit bloke that I was dating in the UK. And he used to say, "You only live once that you remember." And I think when you take that lens to life, there's just magic already in living. And then anything else is sort of the cherry on top or the icing on the cake. And that includes the magic of the idea of potential sexual encounters, particularly with this idea of a right person, right? And sometimes you do experience magic directly related to that. But I think there's already magic in that idea of just living once that we remember. Having said that, I also want to draw on Robert Sternberg, who was a psychologist who posed this idea of the triangular theory of love starting in 1986, which said there are three parts to loving experiences with other humans, right? One part is exactly the core of what you just talked about, that it's all about this emotionality and connectivity and closeness in our sexual encounters and the magic that comes with that. And that's a part of the triangular theory of love or the triarchic theory of love that's known as intimacy. Okay. And we want that in our relationships. It is this feeling of emotion and closeness and connection and bonding and trust. But there's two other parts to, kind of this loving relationship dynamic. One is passion. And that's the drive, the motivation for our intimacy and our connection with people, particularly sexually and romantically. So that includes our physical attraction and our sexual curiosity and our excitement, right? And that's passion. And the last part is commitment. Okay. So if you think of this as a triangle, these three parts, intimacy, passion, and commitment, make up this whole base of a healthy, loving relationship with someone. And so that last part, commitment, is the decision to remain in a relationship towards shared goals, to have a belief in a future together and a willingness to work through challenges that come up. And so this idea, this myth of it'll be magical with really this one person, right, rests on sort of more one part of this, that emotion and maybe the passion, but it's really putting all the eggs in one basket because it's saying we're putting all this magic into this like one encounter. And it's like, but where's the rest of it, right? And that's why that part of the base really matters, the commitment as well, right? Because let's say maybe it doesn't feel magical any more than every other day of life is honestly already magical. But guess what? If you already have that base of commitment, passion, and intimacy, there'll probably be more first times, potentially even with that person or for yourself or other people. So I think that takes some of the pressure off while still recognizing just the inherent magic of just breathing, right? Just breathing into life, including your first time sexual encounters.
So, kind of, we assist the magic by making some kind of decision, by committing
Yeah.
to something. I like that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Not just this one moment in time.
And then there's this one, your partner will take the lead. And this enables passive communication for first timers, thinking the other person will magically know what to do or they'll know what you need emotionally and physically. What is a better way to approach this one?
Right. This is another just such a great read on the myths that perpetuate people's, especially first time sexual encounters, right? Someone's going to be in charge, the other person's going to take the lead. And oftentimes that's tied to two primary things, at least in like dominant Western, particularly North American context. And the first is gender. So if you think about gender, we have ideas about what we've been taught, like through pop culture and maybe even our own upbringing, that the man is supposed to take the lead, right? Including in sexual dynamics. Never mind the fact that often they've not it's not like they've had a chance to do much exploring with bodies that are different than theirs, right? So that's a huge expectation put on someone because of gender, which also puts a cisgender woman in a position of, oh, I can just sit back and not take the lead. And so in heterosexual, now when you tie in the sexual orientation, that's the narrative. Even like in first time encounters, like he's going to take the lead and I'm going to do, whatever happens. And again, I'm not really sure that's really having informed consent for both people, right? And one of the things I often tell people is if you can't talk about sex, you probably shouldn't be having it. And so if you are in a situation where you're making assumptions on who's going to take the lead, perhaps tied to gender and sexual orientation, it might be helpful to talk about that expectation, right? Just to begin with. The other part, and this isn't something we talk about or we have understanding of even from pop culture, is when you start thinking about erotic identities, so kink BDSM rules, there's a dominant person and a sub person, a subordinate person. And some people, just in their everyday walking around life, are more domineering. They are the person who in the meeting takes the lead, that, when they're making plans, they take the lead. And then you've got people who are, following along and more subordinate, and that works fine. The same can happen in erotic or sexual or relational dynamics, right? It might not even be about gender or sexual orientation. And again, what do we do if people are a similar gender, right? Who takes the lead then? I mean, that's confusing because we're both women or we're both men. And I was tying my assumptions to our gender dynamic and now I don't know what to do, right? So if you start thinking of it more as like, it has less to do with my gender and less to do with my own sexuality or sexual orientation, and it has more to do with the kind of relational person I am and dynamic I enjoy, then who knows who's going to want to take the lead more. And you might have people want to switch roles. And that would be okay too. Sometimes someone might want to be more the dom or the sub. But again, I think it comes back to at least having having the ability to talk about it with each other before, during, and after. Right? I think that is the key in terms of figuring out how is our dynamic going to go, instead of just making assumptions which are tied to these beliefs, right? That we just talked about. So yes, it's a great question, and a lot of pressure on people in terms of the mythos.
And then there's this notion that one will instantly feel different afterward, that there will be this dramatic shift. You'll feel grown or validated or somehow transformed. The reality is different most of the times, anticlimactic at times. Can you unpack this myth for us?
This one is so hard. This one, as I reflect on it, I think is actually harder than the first two, really, because we've tied so much. And this is not, I don't just think in westernized culture. I think around the globe, we have tied so much to so many first experiences, right? The first time someone walks, the first time someone runs, the first time they get a degree or a high school degree or they drive a car, right? So much. First time you have an alcoholic beverage, depending on where you grow up. And same with a sexual debut with a partner. There's this feeling that not only is that really important, but it's going to be like these other first times that we build up globally where we're like, yeah, now you'll be this bigger person, older person, more mature person. And I guess I think as I think about it, it's helpful for people to remember, how did you feel about other encounters that you had were firsts? Did it feel like you were that different? Maybe it did. I mean, I'm going to tell you, at least when I, got my undergraduate degree, that felt like I was much more educated and much more mature and much more adult. But, and this is going to come with all the privilege. My other two master's degrees didn't feel that way. They felt like, okay, just more school, right? Even though those were first graduate degrees, but then the doctoral degree felt that way, right? So that felt like, oh my goodness, this is it. I'm finally a doctor, right? Like I should know everything, whatever that means, even though it really just teaches you you know nothing and you knew even less than you thought you did before. So I think it's about reflecting on whether other times that you've had first encounters and how that has changed you either a lot or really not much, even though there was reports from other people that it's going to grow you up or you're going to be, a different person. Because it's okay if it doesn't feel that way for you. Like it isn't, I think you're right. It's not going to feel that way, and it doesn't feel that way for a lot of people. The other thing is, though, it's okay if it does feel that way. Like, it's fine if that makes you feel some sense of like, wow, I get it now. Like, I feel like I'm relationally more mature. So the other part to it, I think, is not just that remembering other firsts and kind of a compare and contrast in your mind before a first sexual debut or encounter. But I think the other part is you probably already had sexual debuts with yourself. So if you think about like self love or self touch or self sex, you, in many ways, you might have already done this. And so actually for some people, and this does happen, they might have their first sexual encounter with a partner. And actually they might be like, oh, that that really wasn't as profound or different than what I've already been doing with myself for, 10 years, depending on when people started engaging in self pleasure, right? So I think if people can remember, like, you probably have already had some of these sexual firsts just with yourself. And honestly, some people say solo sex is better than any other kind of sex because you know your body and you know yourself, right? So that makes you kind of you've already had in many ways a grown up experience with yourself. So another person could maybe contribute to that, but maybe they won't, right? And so just keeping it grounded in who you are and what you've already accomplished is for you is also helpful.
Indeed. And I guess if you know yourself, then you can communicate to the next person what it is that
Yes.
you need, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
which is why going back to taking the lead, it kind of is taking the lead because
Yeah.
even if the other person is the one who initiates actions, right? You still have said, hey, listen, this is the way I like to be touched. I already know that. Or this is the areas I don't have interest in, like having you engage with me in, right? Yeah, absolutely. I think it would totally help with that as well as magic because you'll be like, well, I already bring my own magic, so right?
Exactly.
Everything else could just be an add-on potentially.
So, Dr. Maki, how can someone's first sexual experience, especially the emotional side of it, shape the way that we see ourselves or our approach relationships later on?
Yeah. I think that depending on and I'm defaulting in our conversations to consensual sexual experiences, right? And I know one of your areas of focus in the future is looking at other kinds of encounters. But if something is consensual, part one, I think that's already helps inform who you are in your own emotions and moving forward in other sexual encounters, right? Because you've had a foundation of, okay, maybe this wasn't magical. Maybe it wasn't, perfect or some sort of narrative or myth that I thought it would be. But no matter what, it feels like It was consensual. It feels like I went into it having a sense of who I am and the other person is. And I think that lays a foundation for people to have future sexual encounters with that same person or people or future people where you have that bedrock. Okay, we started with consent. We started with being able to talk about sex. I started with recognizing what I already bring and already know, but also being curious about maybe growing through this experience. And the thing of it is, I mean, I've been teaching sexuality since the 1990s, which makes me 100. And right. And just so everybody knows. And so the thing of it is, and I've been doing sex therapy for like 20 years. Okay. So I guess if we look at that scale, I'm like 75. But every single time I teach a class and talk to a new student or professional, right? Or I work with clients that I'm consulting with, somebody will say something about their own sexual identity or interests or experience where I've never even thought of that, not even heard it, just wow, right? And so to have this idea that someday you're going to be completely sexually knowledgeable and expert and you're going to know everything and totally know exactly who you are all the time and all sexual experiences, I think would be a really unrealistic landing point to go for. So I think it's more balanced to be like, okay, I'm going to continue to learn and grow. I mean, I've almost gotten to the point where I'm like, should I even be in this field? Because I'm like, I'm not perfect at any of this, right? And like, I've been doing this forever. So I just think you have to always remain, and this is why I loved the lens you started with, Mary Jane, because I think you have to remain curious. You have to remain curious about yourself, curious about sexual health and sexuality in general, and then curious about partners if you're going to have them, right? Because that's probably a healthier place than I'm going to one day be a perfect person at who I am sexually and I'm going to know everything. Because guess what? Not even people that are adult film, porn performing athletics people have all the answers, right? Not even them. None of us. Sorry, I don't have all the answers.
It's okay. I mean, like you say, even athletes, even, I don't know, Noah Lyles, he still trains, right?
Yes, yes.
Even though he's a 100-meter champion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we just keep learning. Yes, exactly.
Exactly. And he remains curious about his competitors and about running itself and about right. And it's not like he's doing races without informed consent.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. It's the same in a lot of ways. Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Markie. It's always a pleasure to have you. And thank you for your insights. I learn every time I have a conversation with you, and I appreciate you so much.
Me too. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
When we let go of all those myths, the perfect moment, the instant transformation, the idea that someone else will lead us, what we're left with is a real connection, real feelings, and real experiences, however they unfold. And that's what this podcast is all about, making space for it all. If your first time brought up unexpected feelings, or maybe no feelings at all, would love to hear your story. DM us at Let's Talk First or email sexualencounters the very first at gmail.com, or you can submit your story anonymously at bit.ly/Let's Talk First. In our next episode, we're crossing borders and diving into how first sexual experiences are seen, shaped, and sometimes even celebrated differently around the world. From cultural expectations to secret rebellions, we'll explore how where you grow up can change everything about how you experience your first time or how you feel about it afterward. Stay tuned for first times around the world, because every story and every culture brings its own meaning to the first step into intimacy. Don't miss it. You're listening to Sexual Encounters, the very first time.